My mother slid the dinner bill toward me with a pitying smile, right after announcing I was too poor to be a partner. They clinked crystal glasses, celebrating my exclusion from the family legacy. They had no idea that while they toasted their own cleverness, I was already holding the invisible deed to 67% of the company. They thought they were discarding a spare part, but they had just handed the keys to the new owner. The crystal chandelier above table 4 at the Greyhaven Club did not sparkle. It loomed. It was a heavy, dust-gathering monstrosity that had hung there since before the Great Depression, witnessing generations of business deals sealed with brandy and quiet exclusion. I sat beneath it, keeping my hands folded in my lap to hide the fact that my cuticles were ragged from a week spent on the warehouse floor at Morgan Foundry. Tonight was supposed to be the night. For 3 years, I had quietly pulled the family business back from the brink of operational obsolescence. I had renegotiated the steel contracts when the Asian markets fluctuated. I had implemented the new inventory tracking system that stopped us from bleeding cash on redundant parts. I had done the work that my brother, Graham, found too boring, and my father, Ronan, found too confusing. I was 32 years old. I was the director of operations in title. But in practice, I was the only Morgan actually running the machine. Tonight was the annual strategic dinner. The board was here, the senior partners were here, and I had been told, in that vague but promising way my father liked to use, that we would be discussing the future of the partnership structure. I looked around the table. My mother, Celeste, sat at the head, radiating a cold, polished elegance in a dress that cost more than my car. Graham sat to her right, looking bored, swirling his scotch. He had spent the last 6 months playing golf in Hilton Head while I fixed a supply chain crisis that nearly cost us the municipal contract. My father, Ronan, sat opposite me. He was studying the menu with an intensity that suggested he was trying to decipher a dead language. He would not meet my eyes. That was my first warning. Celeste tapped her spoon against her glass. The sound was sharp, cutting through the low hum of conversation in the private dining room. The room went silent. 12 faces turned toward her. "Thank you all for coming," Celeste said, her voice smooth and practiced. "It has been a challenging year for Morgan Foundry, but a profitable one, and we believe in rewarding the vision that keeps this family legacy alive." I straightened my spine. I prepared my humble acceptance face. I had rehearsed what I would say. I would thank the team. I would mention the logistics overhaul. Celeste smiled, but the warmth did not reach her eyes. It never did. "We are pleased to announce that Graham will be stepping up as the new senior managing partner, effective immediately. His vision for the brand has been exemplary." There was a round of polite applause. Graham nodded, looking smugly humble, as if he had done something other than critique the font size on the quarterly reports. I froze. I waited for the second part, the part about me, and Celeste continued, gesturing to the man at the end of the table. "We are bringing Miles Hartwell on as a full equity partner to solidify our financial leadership. Miles has been a rock for this family." Miles, our CFO, beamed. He was a man with a smile like a used car salesman and eyes like a shark. I waited. The silence stretched. Celeste picked up her wineglass. "Is that it?" I asked. My voice sounded loud in the quiet room. Celeste looked at me as if I had just belched. "Excuse me, Lila?" she asked. I looked from her to Graham, then to my father. "We discussed the operations partnership," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The buy-in. I have the capital ready. We talked about this in January." Graham laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Lila, please," he said. "We did discuss it," Celeste said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But the board feels that partnership requires a certain financial standing, a certain gravitas." I stared at her. "I have the buy-in." I repeated, "I saved every bonus for 5 years." Celeste sighed, the way one sighs at a slow child. "It is not just about the cash, darling," she said. "It is about the profile. You simply are not the right face for ownership. You are effective in the back office, certainly, but a partner needs to project wealth, success, stability, She paused, taking a sip of wine. Frankly, Lila, you are too poor for a business partnership. It would send the wrong message to our lenders if we diluted the equity with someone of your financial stature. The words hung in the air. Too poor. I looked at my father. Dad, I said. Ronan Morgan turned a page on the wine list. He did not look up. It was a family decision. Lila, he mumbled at the paper, we have to do what is best for the firm. I felt a coldness spread from my chest to my fingertips. It was not just a rejection, it was an erasure. They were happy to let me sweat in the foundry, managing the foreman, checking the loading docks at 4 a.m, fixing their mistakes, but they would not let me own it. Graham leaned forward. Don't take it personally. Lee, he said, you are an employee, a very good employee. Let's not make this awkward. I looked at the faces around the table. They were all watching me, waiting for the outburst, waiting for the emotional display that would prove I was indeed too unstable, too weak, too female to sit with the big dogs. I forced my jaw to unclench. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. Understood. I said. The tension in the room broke. They went back to their conversations, dismissing me as easily as they would a waitress who had brought the wrong order. I sat there for 2 more hours. I watched them eat roasted duck and truffled potatoes. I listened to Graham take credit for the logistics efficiency numbers I had achieved. I listened to Miles Hartwell joke about cutting overhead costs, knowing full well he meant cutting the pension contributions for the floor workers. When the meal ended, the waiter brought the bill in a leather folder. He placed it in the center of the table. Usually, the company paid. It was a business expense. Miles Hartwell reached out, grabbed the folder, and opened it. He scanned the total. Then, with a grin that showed too many teeth, he looked at me. Since you are not a partner, Lila, maybe you should contribute, Miles said. You know, to show you are serious about that financial standing. He slid the leather folder across the mahogany table. It stopped right in front of my plate. Graham snickered. Celeste looked away, examining her manicure. It was a test, a petty, small-minded test. If I refused, I was confirming I was too poor. If I paid, I was a sucker. I opened the folder. The bill was for $4,800. I looked at Miles. He was watching me with pure malice. He knew how much I made. He knew this was a month of rent and loans for me. I did not blink. I reached into my purse and pulled out my personal credit card. It was a card I kept for emergencies. For the day the car broke down, or the roof leaked. I placed the card in the folder and snapped it shut. My treat. I said. I pushed it back to the waiter. Miles laughed. A wet, heavy sound. Good girl, he said. I stood up. I did not say goodnight. I walked out of the private dining room, past the heavy curtains, and out into the cool Massachusetts night. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I drove home to my apartment on the south side of Greyhaven. It was a converted mill building, brick and drafty windows. It was nothing like the estate where I grew up, the estate where Graham still lived in the guest house, rent-free. I sat in the dark of my living room for a long time. I thought about the 3 years I'd given them. I thought about the weekends I sacrificed. I thought about the fact that they looked at me and saw nothing but a useful tool, something to be used until it was worn out and then discarded. They called me too poor. I closed my eyes. They had no idea what poverty was. Poverty was not a lack of money. Poverty was a lack of options. And they had just made a mistake. They thought they had stripped me of my options, but they had only stripped me of my loyalty. The next morning, the air in Greyhaven was thick with the smell of wet pavement and iron dust. I arrived at Morgan Foundry Supply at 7 o'clock sharp. I parked my 10-year-old sedan in the back lot, away from the reserved spaces where Miles parked his Porsche and Graham parked his new Land Rover. I walked through the loading bay, nodding to the shift foreman. Sal, morning. Miss Morgan, Sal said, tipping his hard hat. We got that steel shipment from Pittsburgh coming in at 10. I will handle the intake. Sal, I said. I walked up the metal stairs to the administrative offices that overlooked the foundry floor. My office was a glass box in the corner. filled with filing cabinets and schematics. I sat down at my desk and woke up my computer. I needed to approve the purchase order for the Pittsburgh steel. I typed in my password. Access denied. I frowned. I typed it again. Carefully. Access denied. Your account has been disabled. Please contact administrator. I sat back. My stomach turned over. I picked up the phone and dialed the IT department. This is Kevin, the voice said. Kevin, it is Lila. I said, I am locked out of the purchasing system. Can you reset me? There was a long pause on the line. I heard typing. Miss Morgan? Kevin said, his voice dropping to a nervous whisper. I cannot do that. Why not? I asked. I was told your permissions were revoked. He said, Revoked? By whom? By Mr. Hartwell. He sent a memo down this morning, said it was part of a security update. I hung up the phone. A security update. I stood up and walked out of my office. I went straight to the finance department. The hallway felt longer than usual. People looked down as I passed. They knew. In a company this size, gossip traveled faster than electricity. I reached the office of Marina Yates, the HR director. Her door was open. Marina looked up as I entered. She was a kind woman, perpetually exhausted, caught between the family demands and the labor laws. Lila, she said, taking off her glasses, I was about to call you. Why am I locked out? Marina? I asked, standing in front of her desk. Marina sighed. She picked up a folder. We are going through a staff restructuring. Lila, she said, the board feels that the operations director role is redundant. Given Graham's new oversight, redundant. I repeated. I do the work. Graham plays golf. Marina winced. Please, Lila, don't make me say it. You know how this works. So I am fired? I asked. Not fired, Marina said quickly. Placed on administrative leave. Indefinitely. With pay. For 2 weeks. 2 weeks. They were pushing me out. They were not just denying me partnership. They were removing me from the building. They wanted me gone before I could ask questions about why the profits were high, but the cash flow was always tight. Is this legal? I asked. Marina looked at the door, then leaned forward. Lila, she whispered, family decisions are not employee decisions. You serve at the pleasure of the board, and the board is family. She gave me a look that was half apology, half warning. If I were you, she said, I would clear out your personal items, today, before they change the locks on the building, not just the computers. I nodded slowly. I walked back to my office. I did not cry. I was too angry to cry. I grabbed a cardboard box from the supply closet. I started putting my things into it. A framed photo of me and my grandfather. Edwin, my lucky stapler, my engineering certifications. But as I packed, my mind was racing. Why now? Why the rush? If they just wanted to deny me partnership, they could have done that and kept me working. I was cheap labor. I was effective. Why fire the person who makes the company money? Unless I was seeing something they did not want me to see. I looked at my computer. I was locked out of the purchasing system, but I had built the backup archive myself 3 years ago. Before we moved to the cloud, I knew a backdoor into the read-only logs of the legacy server. It would not let me approve orders, but it might let me see recent traffic. I sat down and rebooted the machine in safe mode. I bypassed the network login and went straight to the local cache. It was slow, but it loaded. I scrolled through the vendor payments from the last month. There, a vendor named North Pine Logistics. I had never hired North Pine Logistics. We used huge carriers for our shipping. North Pine was a name I did not recognize. I clicked on the entry. $75,000 paid last Thursday. Another $50,000 on Monday. The line item was labeled expedite fees. We did not pay expedite fees. Our inventory was overstocked. We were paying for storage, not speed. I wrote the name down on a sticky note. North Pine Logistics. I kept scrolling. There was something else. A transfer of assets. 3 milling machines, valued at $200,000 each, had been marked as sold on the ledger. Sold to an entity called Crescent Ridge Industrial LLC. I checked the sale price. $10. My heart hammered against my ribs. They had sold $600,000 worth of equipment to a shell company for $10. That was not bad business. That was theft. I heard footsteps in the hall. I shut down the computer instantly. I shoved the sticky note into my pocket. Graham leaned against my doorframe. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my severance package. Packing up. "Lee?" he asked. I did not look at him. I put the photo of grandfather in the box. "Just cleaning house. Graham." I said, "Good." He said, "We need this office for the new compliance officer. Miles wants to bring in his own guy." I picked up the box. "You are making a mistake," I said. Graham laughed. "The only mistake was letting you think you were one of us." He said, "You are a worker bee. Lila. You always were. Go find a hive that wants you." I walked past him. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to scream, but I did neither. I walked out of the foundry, past the security guard who looked away, and out to my car. My apartment felt silent and empty when I got home. It was barely noon. I was unemployed. I was humiliated, and I was alone. I put the box on the kitchen table. I sat down and put my head in my hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a sick, hollow feeling. My own father had not looked at me. My mother had looked at me with disdain. They did not love me. It was a hard truth, a jagged pill to swallow. They loved what I did for them, but they did not love me. I looked at the box of my things. The photo of grandfather Edwin stared back at me. He had been the only one. Edwin Morgan had built the foundry from a blacksmith shop into a manufacturing giant. He had calloused hands and a loud laugh. He had taught me how to read a blueprint before I could read a novel. He died 5 years ago, leaving the company to his son, my father. I remembered the day of his funeral. Celeste and Graham had been worried about the catering. I had been the only one who cried at the grave. I reached into the box and took out the photo. As I pulled it out, something fell from the back of the frame. It was a small, silver key. I frowned. I turned the frame over. The backing paper was torn slightly. I had never noticed it before. I picked up the key. It was old, tarnished, and then I remembered the trunk. Grandfather had left me an old steamer trunk. It sat in the corner of my bedroom, used as a stand for a pile of blankets. He had told me it was full of his old journals and that I should read them when I was ready to settle down. I had never opened it. I had been too busy working, too busy trying to earn the approval of the people who just fired me. I walked into the bedroom. I pulled the blankets off the trunk. It was leather and wood, battered by travel. I tried the silver key in the lock. It turned with a heavy click. I threw the lid back. The trunk smelled of cedar and old tobacco. It was filled with books, maps, and tools, but right on top, resting on a velvet cloth, was a sealed envelope. It was thick, creamy paper. On the front, in Edwin's sprawling, jagged handwriting, were the words, "Lila, if they corner you, read this." My breath caught in my throat. If they corner you, he knew, even 5 years ago. He knew what they were. I picked up the envelope. My hands were trembling again. I tore the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a smaller card. I unfolded the letter. "My dearest Lila, if you are reading this, it means Ronan has lost his spine and Celeste has shown her teeth. I am sorry. I wanted to believe they would treat you right. But I am a man who bets on odds, not hopes. You are the only one with the iron in your blood, child. You are the only one who actually cares about the work. They will try to cut you out. They will try to tell you that you are nothing. Do not believe them. I did not leave you money in the will because they would have found a way to take it. I left you something else, something they think is gone. Go to the First National Bank of Greyhaven, box number 402. The key is taped to the back of this letter. Then go see Nora Kessler. Her office is above the bakery on Elm Street. Tell her the anchor is lifted. Do not let them win. Lila, it is your company. It always was. Love. Grandfather. I turned the letter over. A small brass key was taped to the paper. I stared at the words. It is your company. The grief that had been choking me for hours began to change. It hardened. It cooled. It turned into something sharp and dangerous. I was not just a fired employee. I was Edwin Morgan's granddaughter, and he had left me a weapon. I looked at the clock. It was 1 in the afternoon. The bank closed at 5. I grabbed my coat. The First National Bank of Greyhaven was a temple of marble and brass, a relic of the days when banks wanted to look like fortresses. I walked to the front desk. I need to access a safe deposit box. I said to the clerk, "Do you have the key and identification?" She asked. I nodded. I slid the brass key and my driver's license across the counter. "Box 402, I said. The clerk typed into her computer. She paused. She frowned. She typed again. "Ms. Morgan," she said slowly. "Is this a joint box?" "No," I said. "It was left to me by my grandfather, Edwin Morgan." The clerk looked at me, then at the screen. "I see," she said. "Well, according to our logs, this box was accessed 3 days ago. The world stopped." "Accessed?" I asked. "By whom?" The clerk turned the screen slightly so I could not see it. "By a representative with authorized documentation," she said. "A Mr. Graham Morgan. He presented a power of attorney for the estate. Graham, my brother, had been here 3 days ago. 3 days before they fired me. Did he take anything?" I asked. My voice sounded very far away. The clerk looked uncomfortable. "I cannot say. Ms. Morgan, we do not track the contents, only the access, but the box is currently listed as active. I need to see it," I said. "Now." She hesitated, then nodded. She led me into the vault. The air was cool and smelled of money. She used her master key, and I used the brass key. She slid the long metal box out of the wall and carried it to a private viewing room. She set it on the table and left, closing the door. I stared at the metal lid. If Graham had been here, it was empty. It had to be empty. He had found the letter before I did, or he had guessed. I lifted the lid. I expected emptiness. I expected a mocking note from my brother, but the box was not empty. Inside was a single, small leather pouch. I opened it. It contained a heavy, gold signet ring, Edwin's ring, the one he wore every day. And underneath the ring was a business card, Kessler Wren, attorneys at law. And on the back of the business card, written in fresh blue ink that looked much newer than the card itself, was a note. He didn't find everything. I stared at the handwriting. It was not Edwin's. It was sharp, precise. Graham had been here. He had taken something, but someone else had been here too. Or Graham had missed this. No, the clerk said Graham accessed it. If Graham accessed it, why was this here? Unless Graham didn't find what he was looking for, or... My mind raced. Authorized documentation. A power of attorney. They were scrubbing the past. They were erasing Edwin's legacy to secure their own. I took the ring and the card. I put them in my pocket. I walked out of the bank into the blinding afternoon sun. They thought they had won. They thought I was at home, crying, looking through the want ads. They had no idea that I had just found the first loose thread in the tapestry of lies they had woven around my life. I walked to my car. I was going to find Nora Kessler, and then I was going to take back what was mine. I touched the ring in my pocket. "You're too poor for business partnership," Celeste had said. I started the engine. "We'll see about that." The office of Kessler and Wren was located above a bakery that smelled of yeast and burnt sugar. The staircase was narrow, the wood worn smooth in the center by decades of footsteps. It was not the kind of place where corporate takeovers were plotted. It was the kind of place where widows updated their wills and small business owners fought over property lines. I pushed open the frosted glass door. A bell chimed, a bright, tinny sound that seemed too cheerful for my mood. Inside, the office was a maze of filing cabinets and towering stacks of paper. Behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single oak tree sat a woman who could only be Nora Kessler. She was in her 60s, with steel gray hair pulled back into a severe bun and eyes that were sharp enough to cut glass. "Can I help you?" she asked. Not looking up from the file she was reading. "I am Lila Morgan." I said, "Edwin Morgan's granddaughter." Nora stopped. Her hand froze over the page. She looked up slowly, removing her reading glasses. She studied my face for a long moment, searching for the resemblance. "Edwin said you had his eyes," she said quietly. "He also said you would only come here if the wolves were at the door." "They are not just at the door," I said, walking forward. "They are inside the house. They fired me yesterday." Nora sighed. It was a sound of deep, weary validation. "Sit down, Lila," she said. I sat. The chair was hard wood, uncomfortable. I placed the business card I had found in the safe deposit box on her desk. "I found this," I said. "And a note. It said he did not find everything." Nora nodded. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. It was dusty, as if it had been waiting for a long time. "Your grandfather was a man who believed in trust," Nora said, "but he also believed in insurance. He knew your father was weak. He knew your mother was ambitious, and he knew Graham was not cut out for the weight of the crown." She opened the folder. Inside were documents stamped with dates from 5 years ago. "Edwin created a safeguard," Nora explained. "A sleeper cell of equity." I frowned. "I do not understand." I said, "The company is owned by the family trust. My father and mother control the voting shares. Graham has a minority stake. I checked the cap table myself before I was locked out." "That is the cap table they want you to see," Nora said. She turned a document toward me. It was a formation document for an entity called Harborlight Equity Partners. "Harborlight is a dormant holding vehicle," Nora said. "When Edwin reorganized the company 10 years ago, he did not transfer all his shares to the Morgan Crest Trust. He moved a block of them, 67% of the voting stock, to be precise, into Harborlight. 67%. I repeated. The number felt impossible. "That is a controlling interest." "Correct," Nora said. "But here's the catch. Harborlight is what we call a conditional entity. It was designed to remain inactive, effectively invisible, unless certain specific conditions were met. Edwin called them integrity triggers." She pointed to a clause on the 3rd page. "Activation of voting rights shall occur immediately upon the event of A. Termination of a direct lineage family member without cause. B. Failure to conduct independent third-party audits for 2 consecutive years. Or C. Executive compensation exceeding 15% of net operating income while company debt increases." I read the words. My breath hitched. "Termination without cause." I whispered, "They fired you." Nora said, "That was the first trigger. But I suspect if we dig, we will find they have tripped the others too." "But where are the shares?" I asked. "If this exists, why is it not in the annual filings?" Nora leaned back. "Because, Lila, your family likely restated the capitalization table. They probably claimed Harborlight was dissolved or merged into the main trust. They buried it. If they filed a restated certificate of incorporation that omitted Harborlight, and no one challenged it, then for all intents and purposes, it does not exist. Until now." I said, "Until now." Nora agreed. "But proving it is going to be a war. We cannot just wave this paper and expect them to hand over the keys. We have to prove the triggers were met, and we have to prove that the dissolution of Harborlight was fraudulent." She looked at me intently. "This will get ugly. Lila, they will not just fight you in court. They will fight you in the streets. They will attack your character. They will try to bankrupt you. Are you sure you want to do this?" I thought about the way Miles Hartwell had laughed when I paid the dinner bill. I thought about my father looking at the wine list instead of his daughter. "I am sure." I said, "The war began quietly. It began with paperwork." I spent the next 3 days in the basement of the county clerk's office and staring at PDF scans from the Secretary of State's online database. Nora had given me a list of what to look for: inconsistencies, amended filings, signatures that looked slightly off. It was tedious, eye-straining work. But I had spent years analyzing supply chain logistics. I knew how to follow a paper trail. I found the smoking gun on a filing from 3 years ago. It was an amendment to the Morgan Crest Trust, ostensibly transferring all residual assets from previous holding companies into the main family pot. It listed Harborlight Equity Partners as a liquidated entity, and at the bottom was the signature of the authorizing trustee, Edwin Morgan. But the date next to the signature was June 4th. Edwin had suffered his final stroke on June 1st. He had been in a coma on June 4th. He could not have signed it. My hand shook as I printed the page. They had forged his signature. Not just forged it. They had done it while he was dying in a hospital bed. I felt a wave of nausea. This was not just greed. This was desecration. I was about to pack up my findings when my phone buzzed. It was a text message. "Lila, it is Mom. We need to talk. This behavior is worrying everyone." I stared at the screen. Behavior? I hadn't done anything yet except go to the library. Then another text came through. This one was a screenshot sent by a friend from college who lived in Boston. "Hey, saw this on Facebook. Is everything okay?" The screenshot was from Celeste's personal page. It was a long, emotional post. Heartbroken to see a family member struggling with mental health issues. "We are doing everything we can to support Lila during this unstable time. Please respect our privacy as we try to get her the help she needs." Unstable. I opened Instagram. My cousin, Sarah, who worked in marketing for the firm, had unfollowed me. So had my aunt. So had 3 of the board members' wives. Then I saw a post from a family friend, a wealthy socialite named Trisha. It was vague but pointed. Sad when jealousy drives people to threaten their own family's legacy. Fraud is an ugly word, but an uglier action. They were getting ahead of the story. They knew I had gone to the bank. They knew I had packed my box. They were painting me as the bitter, unstable ex-employee who was making up lies. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reply to every post. I wanted to post the forged signature for the world to see. But I heard Nora's voice in my head. Do not tip the board into a defensive posture. If I exploded now, I played right into their narrative of instability. I took a deep breath. I put the phone away. I needed to stay focused. I needed money, and I needed leverage. 2 days later, I walked into the offices of Lakeshore Fabrication. Lakeshore was our biggest rival. They were smaller than Morgan Foundry, scrappier, and they had been eating into our market share on the lower-end components for years. I did not go there to apply for a job. I went there to sell a consultant. I met with the owner, a gruff man named Jim Halloway, who had been trying to buy me a drink at trade shows for 5 years. "Lila Morgan," Jim said, leaning back in his creaking chair. "I heard you went off the deep end." I sat straight, my hands folded on his desk. "You heard what my mother wanted you to hear." "Jim," I said, "the truth is, I was fired because I asked why we were paying expedite fees to a logistics company nobody had ever heard of." Jim raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" he asked. "I know your pricing model." "Jim," I said, "I know where you are bleeding margin. I know you are overpaying for raw steel because you do not have the volume to negotiate the bulk rates." Jim chewed on a toothpick. And I can fix your supply chain in 6 weeks." I said, "I will save you 15% on procurement. In exchange, I want a consulting fee, paid weekly, and I want access to your vendor intelligence data." "Why?" he asked. "Because I want to know who else is using North Pine Logistics." I said. Jim stared at me for a long time. Then he grinned. "You really are out for blood, aren't you?" "I am out for clarity." I said, "He hired me on the spot. The work at Lakeshore was grounding. It was pure numbers, pure logic. It kept me sane while the rest of my life was being dismantled on social media, and it gave me the answer I needed. I ran a query on North Pine Logistics through Lakeshore's industry database. Lakeshore didn't use them, but the database tracked carrier ratings and ownership records. North Pine Logistics was not a major carrier. It was a single truck operation registered to a residential address in South Boston. The owner of record was Evan Salter. I knew that name. Evan Salter was Graham's best friend from prep school. They had played lacrosse together. They went on ski trips together. The expedite fees, hundreds of thousands of dollars, were not going to shipping. They were going directly into a shell company owned by my brother's buddy. And from there, I had no doubt, a significant chunk was finding its way back to Graham's pocket. It was profit siphoning. Plain and simple. Graham was stealing from the company to fund his lifestyle, and my mother was letting him do it. I printed the ownership record. Another piece of the puzzle. I was leaving Lakeshore late one evening, walking across the dark parking lot, when a figure stepped out from behind my car. I jumped, clutching my bag to my chest. "Lila," a voice hissed. It was a man. He was wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled up, but I recognized the posture, the nervous, twitchy energy. "Jules?" I asked. Jules Merritt stepped into the light of the street lamp. He looked terrible. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with red. Jules was an internal accountant at Morgan Foundry. We had worked together on the quarterly audits. He was a good kid. Quiet, terrified of authority. "What are you doing here?" I asked, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "I saw the legal request," Jules said, his voice shaking. "What legal request?" "The one your lawyer filed. For the preservation of records. It came through yesterday." Nora had filed a narrow motion to prevent the destruction of documents. It was a warning shot. "Lila, you have to stop," Jules said. He was wringing his hands. "Why?" I asked. "Because you are scared?" "Because they are shredding things," Jules whispered. "Miles." He came down to the archives. He made me pull the binders from 5 years ago, the board minutes. I stepped closer. "What did he make you do?" "Jules?" "He made me reprint them," Jules said, tears welling in his eyes, with different text. "He made me backdate them." He stood there and watched me sign the witness line with a pen he took from a box of old supplies so the ink would look aged. My stomach churned, forging the past. Again. "Jules," I said softly, "you know that is a felony." "I know," he hissed. "But what was I supposed to do? I have a mortgage. I have a baby coming. Miles said if I didn't do it, he would pin the inventory discrepancies on me." He grabbed my arm. His grip was desperate, but that is not the worst part. "Lila, what is?" I asked. "The loan," he said. "What loan?" "The Harrogate Capital loan. The one secured against Ridgefield Works." Ridgefield Works was the company's crown jewel. It was the massive industrial complex where our main foundry operated. The land alone was worth $40 million. "What about it?" I asked. "There is a side letter," Jules said. "It is not in the main credit agreement. It is in a separate safe. I saw it when Miles opened the safe to get the old seal." He looked over his shoulder. "It has a covenant. Lila. A change of control clause. That is standard." I said, "If the company is sold, the loan is called." "No," Jules said. "It is specific. It says that if the Morgan family loses voting control, or if the board composition changes by more than 50%, the loan goes into immediate default, and the penalty interest is retroactively applied to the principal." I did the math in my head. A retroactive penalty on a loan that size. It would bankrupt the company overnight. They would lose the building. They would lose everything. "That is why they are so afraid of you," Jules said. "It is not just about the shares. If you trigger the activation of Harbor Light, you change the control. You trigger the default. You blow up the whole world." I stood there in the cold parking lot, the wind biting at my face. They had leveraged the company's survival on their own absolute power. They had built a bomb into the foundation of the business, assuming they would always hold the detonator. "Jules," I said, "will you testify to this? If it comes to it?" Jules looked terrified. He pulled his hood down further. I cannot, Lila. They will destroy me. They are already destroying you." I said, "They made you a criminal." He backed away. "I just wanted you to know," he said. "Don't blow it up. Lila, innocent people will get hurt." He turned and ran into the darkness. I went straight to Nora's office the next morning. I told her everything. The forged minutes, the North Pine graft, the Harrogate loan. Nora listened, tapping a pen against her desk. "This changes the calculus," she said. "How?" I asked. "If we sue for the shares now," Nora said, "and we win. We trigger the default. The company collapses. You win 67% of a smoking crater." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street. "We need a different kind of leverage," she said. "We need to hold the gun." Not just the bullet. What do you suggest? We don't sue yet. Nora said, We buy into the debt. I frowned. The Harrogate loan? I cannot afford that. It is millions of dollars. Not the whole loan. Nora said, We find a piece of it, or we find a lien. She turned back to me. Commercial loans like that are often syndicated, or they have tranches. If we can buy a distressed slice, or a vendor lien that has seniority, you become a creditor. A creditor. I repeated. Creditors have rights that shareholders do not. Nora said, Creditors can demand audits. Creditors can force discovery without a lawsuit. Creditors can threaten liquidation if they suspect fraud. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. If you own the debt, Nora said, you can walk into that boardroom not as a disgruntled daughter, but as the person who owns their mortgage. You can force them to negotiate the activation of Harbor Light as a condition of not foreclosing, but I still need capital. I said, I have my savings. But it is not enough to buy commercial debt. Nora smiled. A small, tight smile. Then we find a silent partner. Someone who hates bad management as much as you do. I knew exactly who to call. Daria Voss was a legend in the manufacturing world. She had been my mentor when I was fresh out of college. Before I went to work for the family, she ran a private equity firm that specialized in turning around distressed industrial companies. She was tough, fair, and she had zero tolerance for nepotism. I met her at a coffee shop in Boston. I laid it all out. The outline of the fraud, the hidden shares, the plan. Daria listened, sipping her black coffee. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she looked at me. So, let me get this straight. Daria said, You want to buy a participation interest in a loan that is likely toxic, to force a board of directors, who happen to be your family, to admit they stole a company from you? Yes, I said. And if you win? Daria asked. What then? Then I fix it. I said, I fire the people who are bleeding it dry. I pay the workers what they are worth. I rebuild the reputation. And the family? She asked. I looked at my hands. The family is already gone. Daria. They made their choice. Daria nodded. She reached into her bag and pulled out a checkbook. I am not doing this for charity. Leela, she said, I want an 8% return on my note, and I want first refusal on the logistics contracts when you take over. Deal, I said. She wrote a check. It was for $200,000. Combine this with your savings, Daria said. It should be enough to buy out one of the smaller syndicate partners in the Harrogate deal. There is always a nervous investor looking to exit a risky position. Thank you. Daria, I said. She handed me the check. Don't thank me, she said. Just win. Nora moved fast. She used her contacts in the secondary debt market. Within 48 hours, she found a small asset management firm that held a slice of the Harrogate loan. They were jittery about the manufacturing sector and happy to unload the paper at a slight discount. We set up the transfer. I used every dime I had saved for a house, for a wedding I never had, for a future that was no longer possible. I added Daria's money. I signed the papers in Nora's office on a rainy Tuesday. The wire transfer went through at 4 o'clock. Nora handed me a document. Assignment of debt and security interest. It was done. I owned a piece of Morgan Foundry's debt. I sat back in the chair, feeling the weight of the paper in my hand. What now? I asked. Nora took off her glasses. Now, she said, we send a letter, not a lawsuit. A formal notice of inquiry from a creditor regarding potential covenant breaches. She typed on her keyboard. We ask about the expedite fees. We ask about the equipment sale to Crescent Ridge. We ask about the inventory discrepancies. And we give them 48 hours to respond before we declare a technical default. She looked at me. They will panic. Lila. They will know someone is watching. But they won't know it is you. Not at first. The debt is held in a trust name. What trust name did you use? I asked. Nora smiled. Ironwood Holdings. Ironwood. That was the name of the street where my grandfather grew up. Perfect, I said. I walked out of Nora's office into the rain. I felt different. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the poor relation. I checked my phone. Another notification. Another cousin had blocked me. Another vague, passive-aggressive post from Celeste about ungrateful children. I didn't care. Let them post. Let them spin their stories. Let them think they had successfully exiled me to the wilderness. They were playing a social game. I was playing a financial one. I pulled my collar up against the wind. The city of Greyhaven looked different to me now. It wasn't just a collection of buildings. It was a battlefield, and I had just bought the ammunition. I walked to my car, the assignment of debt document tucked safely inside my coat, right next to my heart. The first shot had been fired. Now, I just had to wait for the echo. The response from Morgan Foundry arrived 3 days after we sent the demand letter from Ironwood Holdings. It was printed on thick, cream-colored bond paper, the kind my mother insisted on because she believed the texture of stationery conveyed authority. I sat in Nora Kessler's office, watching her read it. The bakery downstairs was baking cinnamon rolls, but the smell made me nauseous today. "They are stonewalling," Nora said. Tossing the letter onto her desk, I picked it up. The language was polite, legalistic, and dismissive. "Dear Sirs, regarding your inquiry into our operational expenses, Morgan Foundry Supply maintains strict confidentiality regarding its vendor relationships. As a creditor holding a minority participation in the Harrogate facility, Ironwood Holdings does not possess the requisite standing to audit internal ledgers. We assure you that all covenants remain in good standing." "They are lying." I said. "They are not in good standing. They are looting the place." Nora took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Of course they are lying. Lila, that is what people do when they are hiding a fire. They lock the doors and claim the smoke is just fog." She pulled a thick binder from her shelf. It was the master loan agreement for the Harrogate debt we had purchased. "However," she continued, a glint of steel entering her voice, "they made a mistake. They assumed Ironwood Holdings was just a passive investor looking for a coupon payment. They did not read the fine print of the B-tranche debt." She flipped to page 42. "Here," she said, pointing to a paragraph dense with legalese. "In the event of an unexplained variance in operating cash flow exceeding 10% quarter over quarter, the lender reserves the right to request a schedule of all material disbursements." She looked up at me. "How much did you say those expedite fees to North Pine Logistics were?" $125,000 in a single month. I said, "Plus the payments to Crescent Ridge." Nora smiled. It was not a nice smile. That is well over 10% of the operating cash flow for that quarter. She drafted a new letter. This one did not ask. It commanded. It cited the specific clause. Section 4, paragraph B. It gave them 24 hours to produce the schedule of disbursements or face an immediate notice of default. Sending that letter felt like lighting a fuse. I went home to my apartment and waited. I paced the floor. I reorganized my bookshelf. I tried to eat, but food tasted like cardboard. The next afternoon, a courier arrived at Nora's office with a box. They had sent the data, but as we opened the files, it became clear they were still playing games. "It is sanitized," I said, flipping through the pages. The vendor names were redacted in places. The descriptions were vague: consulting services, logistics support, asset management, but they had been sloppy, or perhaps they were just arrogant. I spent 6 hours going through the ledger, cross-referencing the amounts with the mental map of the company I had built over 3 years. Then I found it. Page 90. A recurring monthly payment of $18,000 to Crescent Ridge Industrial LLC. The line item was labeled Equipment Lease, Haas VF4 Milling Centers. I stared at the paper. My blood ran cold. "Nora," I said. "What is it?" she asked, looking up from her own stack. "They are paying $18,000 a month to lease 3 Haas milling machines." I said, "Is that a bad price?" Nora asked. I looked at her. "We own those machines." "Nora, I bought them myself 2 years ago. I signed the check. We paid cash, $200,000 each. We own them outright." Nora stood up and came around the desk. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I am positive." I said, "I remember the serial numbers. I remember arguing with the dealer about the warranty." I pulled up the redacted asset list they had sent. There they were, the same machines. But now, Instead of being listed as capital assets, they were listed as leased inventory. Do you know what they did? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. They sold the machines to themselves. They transferred the title to Crescent Ridge for pennies, and now they are renting them back to the company at a premium. It is a classic strip mining tactic, Nora said softly. They are pulling the equity out of the hard assets and putting cash into their own pockets. While the company foots the bill, it is theft. I said, it is fraud. Nora corrected, and it is proof. I needed more than just the ledger. I needed the intent. The ledger showed what happened. But to trigger the integrity clause in grandfather's hidden trust, to activate the Harbor Light shares, I needed to prove who ordered it. I needed Jules. I texted him from a burner phone Nora had given me. I know about the milling machines. I know about the leaseback. Meet me tonight. He didn't reply for 2 hours. Then, a single word. Where? I told him to meet me at the old commuter lot near the highway, a place where people park their cars to take the bus into Boston. At 10 o'clock at night, it would be deserted. I parked my car in the darkest corner, under a broken street lamp. The wind was howling, rattling the loose window of my sedan. At 10:15, a battered Honda Civic pulled in. It parked 2 spots away. Jules got out. He was wearing a heavy coat and a wool hat pulled low. He looked over his shoulder twice before walking to my car. I unlocked the passenger door. He slid in, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. You shouldn't have contacted me, Jules said, his voice jumping. They are monitoring the emails. They installed keyloggers on the accounting terminals. Who did? I asked. Miles? Miles gave the order, Jules said, but the IT guys did it. I turned to face him. Jules, I saw the ledger. I saw the lease payments to Crescent Ridge. You are paying rent on machines we own. Jules put his face in his hands. I know, he whispered. I tried to stop it. I told Miles we couldn't just reclassify assets without a sale record. He told me to shut up and process the invoice. He looked up at me, desperation in his eyes. Lila, they are draining the accounts. It is not just the machines, it is the inventory too. They are writing off perfectly good steel as scrap and selling it out the back door to a scrap dealer in New Jersey. Graham, I said, that sounds like Graham. Jules nodded. Graham gets the scrap cash, Miles gets the lease payments, and your mother? He stopped. What about my mother? I asked. Jules reached into his coat pocket. His hand was shaking so badly he dropped the object on the floor mat. I reached down and picked it up. It was a silver thumb drive. I made a copy. Jules said, I don't know why. Maybe because I knew they would try to pin it on me when the audit comes. Maybe because I felt guilty about you. What is on this? I asked, clutching the cold metal. Email chains, he said. Deleted ones. I recovered them from the server trash before the nightly purge. He took a breath. There is an email from Miles to the team. Subject line, clean the ledger. He gives specific instructions on how to backdate the board minutes to authorize the sale of the machines to Crescent Ridge. He explicitly says, make sure the dates precede Lila's termination. That proves premeditation. I said, it proves conspiracy. Jules said, and there is more. There are drafts of the minutes. You can see the track changes. You can see them editing your grandfather's old approvals to make it look like he signed off on the trust changes. I stared at the thumb drive. This was it. This was the weapon I had been looking for. Why are you giving me this? Jules? I asked. He looked out the window at the dark parking lot. Because I have a daughter, Lila. She is 2 years old, and I don't want her to grow up knowing her father went to prison for a bunch of rich people who treat him like garbage. He opened the door. Please, Lila, be careful. They are getting paranoid. Miles screams at people in the hallways. Your mother is firing anyone who looks at her wrong. He stepped out into the cold. Jules, I said. He stopped. Thank you. He didn't look back. He got into his car and drove away, his taillights disappearing into the night. I drove home with the thumb drive in my pocket. My heart should have been soaring. I had them. I had the proof. But instead, I felt a heavy, sickening weight in my stomach. These were the people I had eaten Thanksgiving dinner with. These were the people who had bought me my first bicycle. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I just wanted what was fair. I wanted the legacy my grandfather built. But looking at the depth of their betrayal, I realized they had already destroyed themselves. They had hollowed out their own souls for money. The next morning, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Dad." I stared at it. He hadn't called me since the dinner. He hadn't called when I was fired. He hadn't called when the smear campaign started. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. "Hello?" I said. "Lila." His voice was soft, wavering. "Lila. Honey. Hello? Dad?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We need to talk," he said. "This has gone on long enough. This fighting. It is killing your mother. It is tearing the family apart." "Is it?" I asked. "I thought the family was doing fine." "Graham seems to be enjoying his new role." There was a silence on the line. "Please, Lila," he said, "meet me for brunch. Just you and me. No lawyers. No Graham. Just father and daughter. Let's fix this." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to hang up, but another part, the part of me that was still the little girl who wanted her father to be proud of her, softened. "Okay, Dad," I said. "Where?" "The boathouse," he said. "At 11. The boathouse was a place we used to go for Sunday brunch when I was a kid. It sat on the river, bright and airy. I arrived 5 minutes early. Ronan was already there. He sat at a corner table, looking out at the water. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped. When he saw me, he stood up. He looked like he wanted to hug me, but I stayed on my side of the table. He awkwardly patted the back of his chair and sat down. "You look good." "Lila," he said. "Strong. I am surviving." I said, "We ordered coffee." The waiter left us alone. Ronan stirred his coffee, staring at the swirling liquid. "I miss you at the office," he said. "The place isn't the same. The systems, they aren't running like they used to. They aren't running because you fired the only person who understood them." I said. Ronan winced. "I know." He said, "I know it was harsh. But Celeste, she felt it was necessary to clarify the leadership structure. Clarify it by removing the competence?" I asked. Ronan sighed. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Look, Lila, we made a mistake. I admit that. We shouldn't have cut you off like that." He pulled out a thick envelope and placed it on the table. "We want to make it right," he said. "We want peace." I looked at the envelope. "What is this?" I asked. "It is a reconciliation package," Ronan said, his voice gaining a little performative hopefulness. "It is a severance agreement, but generous, very generous." He pushed it toward me. 2 years of salary, Lila, full benefits, and a lump sum of $200,000 to help you start your own venture. I didn't open it. I knew what was inside. "And what do I have to sign?" I asked. Ronan looked away. "Just the standard release forms," he said. "A non-disclosure agreement regarding company operations. And a waiver. A waiver of what?" "A waiver of any and all future claims regarding equity or ownership," he mumbled. "Just to clean up the cap table. So we can move forward." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. He wasn't here to apologize. He was here to buy me off. He was here because Ironwood Holdings had sent a letter, and they were scared. They wanted me to sign away my rights before I figured out I had them. They didn't know I was Ironwood. But they knew I was a threat. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had taught me to fish on this very river. "You know, don't you?" I asked softly. "Know what?" he asked, blinking. "You know about the fraud. Dad, you know about Crescent Ridge. You know about North Pine." Ronan's face went pale. "Lila, keep your voice down. That is complex business strategy. You don't understand the tax implications. I understand theft." I leaned forward. "I have one question for you. Dad, if you answer it honestly, I will take this envelope and walk away." Ronan looked at me, hope flaring in his eyes. "Anything. Lila, who opened grandfather's safe deposit box?" I asked. The hope vanished. His eyes darted to the left, then down. He licked his lips. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. You do. I said, the bank records show it was accessed 3 days before you fired me, by a family member. Was it you? Ronan stared at the tablecloth. His hands were trembling. It was Graham, he whispered. But Celeste sent him. Why? I asked. What were they looking for? Ronan looked up. His eyes were wet. But it wasn't sadness. It was fear. Weak, pathetic fear. They were looking for the letter. He said, Edwin told me once, when he was sick, that he had written a letter about the triggers. Celeste wanted it gone. So you let them rob a dead man's box to protect your own comfort. I said. Ronan reached for my hand across the table. Lila, please. You can't fight her. She will destroy you. Just take the money. Go to Europe. Start over. Please. I pulled my hand away. I stood up. I didn't touch the envelope. I am not going to Europe. Dad. I said, I am staying right here. I walked out of the restaurant. I left him sitting there with his checkbook and his cowardice. That was the moment the daughter died, and the creditor was born. I went straight to Nora. File it, I said. Nora looked at my face. She saw the hard set of my jaw. The lawsuit? She asked. No, I said. Not the full suit. Not yet. If we sue for ownership now, they will shred everything before discovery starts. We need to freeze them. I handed her the thumb drive Jules had given me. File a preservation order. I said, an ex parte motion. Tell the judge we have credible evidence of ongoing spoliation of evidence. Use the emails from the drive as the exhibit. Nora plugged in the drive. She scanned the files. Her eyebrows shot up. This email from Miles. Clean the ledger. This is a smoking gun. Lila, a judge will grant this in a heartbeat. Do it. I said, stop the shredders. Nora worked through the night. She filed the motion at 8 a.m. The next morning. By noon. We were in the chambers of Judge Halloway. Nora presented the affidavit from Jules, redacted to protect his identity for now, and the email chains. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for corporate games, read the papers. She looked over her glasses at the lawyer Morgan Foundry had rushed over, a slick associate from a big city firm. This looks like active destruction of records. Counselor, the judge said. Your Honor, this is simply routine server maintenance, the associate stammered. I am issuing the order, the judge said, slamming her gavel. Morgan Foundry is hereby enjoined from deleting, altering, or moving any digital or physical records, effective immediately. I am appointing an independent forensic monitor to oversee their IT systems until this matter is resolved. We walked out of the courthouse. I felt a grim satisfaction. We had handcuffed them. 2 days later, the forensic monitor, an IT contractor named Ben, called Nora. We were in her office, drinking stale coffee. Nora put the call on speaker. Ms. Kessler, Ben said, I have completed the preliminary index of the deletion logs. And? Nora asked. Well, the plaintiff was right, Ben said. There was a mass deletion event scheduled. But here's the strange thing. What is strange? I asked. Most of the deletion requests came from the CFO's account, as you suspected, Ben said. But the deletion schedule for the executive archives, the deep storage, the stuff from 5 years ago, that was altered the same week Ms. Morgan was locked out. By whom? Nora asked. By a user with root access. Ben said, the account name is admin. I froze. CM. I whispered. Celeste Morgan. My mother. It wasn't Miles. Miles was just the hatchet man. Celeste was the one erasing the history. She was the one who had tried to scrub Edwin's legacy. She knew. I said, she knew about Harbor Light. She knew the whole time. Of course she did. Nora said grimly. She was Edwin's daughter-in-law for 30 years. She knew how he thought. We had the preservation order. We had the debt leverage. But we were running out of time. Rumors started swirling in the business journals. Morgan Foundry in talks with Brackenrow Industries. I knew Brackenrow. They were a roll-up firm. They bought family businesses, stripped them of assets, merged them into a massive conglomerate, and issued new stock. If Morgan Foundry merged with Brackenrow, the corporate entity would change. The shares of Morgan Foundry would be converted into shares of Brackenrow. And if that happened, my 67% of Morgan Foundry, my hidden stake, would be diluted. I would own 67% of a company that no longer existed. In the new structure, that stake might translate to less than 1%. They are trying to wash the equity. I told Nora, they are rushing the merger to dilute me out of existence before I can claim the shares. We have to stop the deal. Nora said, "How?" I asked. "We don't have voting rights yet. We are just creditors. We need to prove that the Harbor Light shares are already active." Nora said, "We need to prove that the triggers were tripped before the merger talk started." She started digging through the box of documents from grandfather's trunk again. She spread them out on the floor. "There has to be something," she muttered. Edwin was meticulous. He wouldn't have left the triggers vague. She picked up a yellowed piece of paper. It was an addendum to the trust formation. "Lila, look at this," she said. I knelt beside her. "Trigger C," she read. "Executive compensation exceeding 15% of net operating income while company debt increases." We know they did that. I said, "Graham's salary is huge." "Yes, but look at the footnote." Nora said, her finger traced a line of tiny text. "For the purposes of this calculation, executive compensation shall include any payments made to entities controlled by immediate family members of the executive team." I stared at the words. North Pine Logistics. I said, "Exactly." Nora said, "North Pine is owned by Graham's friend. The expedite fees are effectively payments to Graham." She grabbed a calculator. She punched in the numbers from the sanitized ledger. "The North Pine payment started 8 months ago," she said. She calculated the ratio against the operating income. She looked up, her eyes wide. 18%, she said. My heart hammered. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means the trigger wasn't pulled when they fired you." Nora said, "It was pulled 8 months ago." She stood up, holding the paper like a shield. "Lila, the Harbor Light shares didn't activate last week. They activated 8 months ago. You have been the majority shareholder for the better part of a year." I stood up slowly. "If I was the shareholder 8 months ago, then every board vote they have taken since then is invalid." Nora said, "Every dividend they paid is illegal. And this merger? They don't have the authority to approve it." She looked at me, a fierce grin breaking across her face. "You don't just have a claim. Lila, you have the company. We just have to walk in and tell them." I looked out the window at the skyline of Greyhaven. They were rushing to sell the company to Brackenrow to hide their theft. But they were trying to sell something they didn't own. "Get the papers ready." "Nora," I said, "we aren't sending a letter this time." "No?" Nora asked. "No," I said, "we are going to the shareholder meeting, and I'm going to take my seat." The morning after we realized the triggers had been activated, Nora Kessler drafted a letter that was less of a legal notice and more of a declaration of war. We were no longer writing as Ironwood Holdings, the creditor. We were writing as Lila Morgan, the beneficial owner of 67% of the voting stock of Morgan Foundry under the terms of the Harbor Light Equity Partner Structure. We sent the demand via courier to the corporate secretary. We demanded a full inspection of the corporate books, the minutes, and the shareholder registry, citing Section 220 of the Delaware General Corporation Law and the specific activation clauses of my grandfather's trust. I sat in Nora's office, watching the clock. "They have to respond," Nora said, pacing the worn rug. "If they ignore a beneficial ownership claim, they are breaching fiduciary duty on a level that pierces the corporate veil. Personal liability, they won't ignore it," I said. Looking out at the rain-slicked street, "They will try to bury it." 2 hours later, we got our answer. It wasn't a phone call. It was a blast email sent to all shareholders, which, ironically, still included me on the minor employee stock list I had never cashed out. Notice of Emergency Special Meeting of Shareholders. Agenda: Ratification of Merger Agreement with Brackenrow Industries. Date: Friday, October 24th. That is 3 days from now. I said, staring at the screen. They are trying to outrun us, Nora said, reading over my shoulder. They denied your inspection request. Look, here is the rejection attached. They claim you are not a shareholder of record, and that your claim is frivolous and harassed-based. She slammed her hand on the desk. They are rushing the merger. If Brackenrow absorbs Morgan Foundry before we validate your shares, your 67% of the foundry becomes a minority claim in a lawsuit against a shell company that no longer exists. They wash the equity. Can we stop the vote? I asked. We can try to get an injunction, Nora said. But judges hate stopping business deals based on potential ownership. We need leverage that scares them more than a lawsuit. I looked at the file on the desk. The Harrogate loan documents. We have leverage, I said. I picked up the phone. What are you doing? Nora asked. I am calling the bank. I said, I am calling Harrogate Capital as a concerned creditor. I dialed the number for the loan syndication officer listed on the documents. This is Ironwood Holdings. I told the officer when he answered, we hold a participation interest in the Morgan Foundry facility. We have received notice of a pending merger with Brackenrow Industries. Yes, we are aware, the officer said, sounding bored. Standard consolidation. Are you aware that the change of control clause in the B-tranche covenants is triggered by any merger that dilutes the founding family's voting power below 51%? I asked. There was a pause, the shuffling of papers. I believe the Morgan family will retain a board presence, the officer said. Board presence is not voting control, I said, keeping my voice cool and professional. Under the terms of the side letter, which I am sure you have in your vault, a merger of this type triggers an immediate technical default. The entire $40 million principal becomes due. The silence on the other end was heavy. And, I added, twisting the knife, Ironwood Holdings intends to vote against any waiver of that default. We want our money. If that merger goes through, we will file for liquidation of the collateral, meaning Ridgefield Works. Ridgefield Works was the only real asset securing the loan. If the bank seized the factory, the company was dead. I will have to call the borrower, the officer said, his voice tight. I hung up. Nora looked at me with a mixture of shock and admiration. You just threatened to blow up the building to save it, she said. I didn't threaten. I said, I just pointed out the wiring. The panic inside Morgan Foundry must have been instantaneous. Within an hour, my phone began to buzz with calls from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then, a text from Jules. Chaos. Miles is screaming at the lawyers. They say the bank called and threatened to pull the credit line. Graham threw a chair in the conference room. I felt a grim satisfaction. They thought they were playing a game of chess where they could just sweep the pieces off the board. They forgot that the board itself had rules. But panic makes people dangerous. That evening, I met Jules again. He was too scared to meet in person. So we used an encrypted messaging app Nora had set up. Jules, they are terrified of the bank, but they are more terrified of you. They think you are working with Ironwood. Lila. I am Ironwood, or at least, I own the debt. Jules. Graham is spiraling. He knows if the merger fails, the audit happens, and if the audit happens, Lila. What else is there? Jules, I know about the North Pine payments. I know about the machinery leaseback. What else? There was a long pause. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared 3 times. Jules, it wasn't just stealing for profit. It was gambling. Lila, what do you mean? Jules, Graham fancies himself an investor. 2 years ago, he used $3 million of operating cash to buy copper futures. He thought the market was going to spike. I closed my eyes. Copper futures. It was the most volatile, risky market in the industrial sector. Lila. And the market tanked? Jules. It crashed. He lost $2.4 million in 3 weeks. Miles covered it up. They booked it as inventory hedging. They claimed we bought physical copper that was lost in transit or scrapped due to quality issues. Lila. That is why cash flow has been tight. That is why we couldn't afford the new roof for the warehouse. Jules. Yes, they are robbing the company to pay for Graham's casino habits. And Brackenrow. The merger deal includes a management retention bonus for Graham. $5 million. Lila. He is using the merger to pay back what he stole before anyone notices. Jules. Exactly. If the merger happens, the old books are sealed. The new auditors start fresh. No one ever looks at the inventory hedging from 2023. I stared at the screen. It wasn't just greed. It was incompetence. Graham had burned millions of dollars playing Wall Street with money that belonged to the welders and machinists on the floor. Lila. Will you testify to this? Jules? Jules. I can't. Not yet. Miles told me today that if I talk, he will pin the copper loss on me. He said my signature is on the approval. Lila. Your signature that he forced you to sign? Jules. Who is going to believe the junior accountant over the CFO and the owner? Lila. I will. Jules. I put the phone down. The stakes had just shifted. This wasn't just about reclaiming my birthright. It was about stopping a crime that was actively bleeding the company to death. The next morning, the doorbell rang at my apartment. I looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood in the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. Had something happened to my father? I opened the door. Lila Morgan? The taller officer asked. Yes. We need to ask you some questions regarding a complaint filed by Morgan Foundry Supply. He said, A complaint? I asked, stepping back to let them in. Allegations of corporate espionage and theft of proprietary data. The officer said. I stood very still. Theft? The officer pulled a notepad from his pocket. We have a statement from the Director of Operations claiming that you accessed the company server remotely after your termination and downloaded sensitive client lists and pricing algorithms. I laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous sound. I was locked out of the system the morning I was fired. I said, my access was revoked at 7:30 a.m. The officer looked at me with a neutral, bored expression. The complaint alleges you used a backdoor admin account. They have logs showing a download at 3 a.m. on Tuesday. Tuesday. That was the night I met Jules. This is a mistake, I said, or a lie. Ma'am, we are just investigating. But given the value of the data, this is a felony matter. We would like to request that you surrender your laptop and phone for forensic imaging. I looked at them. I knew my rights. I could demand a warrant. I could slam the door. But that is what a guilty person would do. And that is what Celeste wanted. She wanted a scene. She wanted me to be dragged out in handcuffs so she could shake her head and tell the board I was out of control. I took a deep breath. I have nothing to hide. Officer, I will surrender my devices to my attorney. Nora Kessler, you can coordinate the imaging with her. I am not giving my personal property to the people accusing me without a chain of custody. The officer hesitated, then nodded. That is acceptable. We will meet you at her office in 1 hour. As they left, my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen. Mom, I answered. Hello. Celeste, I said. Lila. Her voice was thick with fake concern. The police just called me. They said they were at your apartment. You know they were. Mother, you sent them. Lila, please, we are worried about you. Graham found the logs. Why are you doing this? Stealing data? Are you trying to sell it to Lakeshore? I am not stealing anything, I said, my voice steady. I am trying to save the company you are letting Graham destroy. There was a pause. Then her voice dropped the sweet facade. It became ice. You are sick. Lila, you are obsessed. We are trying to handle this quietly, for the family name. But if you keep pushing, we will press charges. We will have you arrested. For what? I asked. For finding out about the copper futures? The silence on the line was absolute. I heard a sharp intake of breath. I know about the $3 million. Celeste, I know about the hedging. I know Graham is an incompetent gambler and you are his enabler. Lila, she whispered, stop the merger, Mother, or I will tell the bank exactly where their collateral went. I hung up. I went to Nora's office. The police were there. I handed over my laptop and my phone. "Do not worry," Nora said, patting my arm. "We will have our own expert mirror the drive before they touch it." I felt naked without my phone. I felt vulnerable, but I also felt a strange, cold confidence. I knew I hadn't logged in, which meant they had forged the logs. And if they forged the logs, they left fingerprints. Nora filed an emergency motion for a hearing regarding the device seizure. She argued that the accusation was retaliation for the demand letter we had sent. The judge granted a hearing for the next afternoon. We walked into the courtroom. The Morgan Foundry lawyer was there, looking smug. Miles Hartwell was there, sitting in the back, checking his watch. "Your Honor," Nora said, standing tall, "my client has voluntarily surrendered her devices. However, we have also conducted a preliminary review of the alleged intrusion." She held up a report from Ben, our forensic IT expert. "The plaintiff claims Ms. Morgan used a back door to access the server at 3 a.m. on Tuesday. However, the IP address associated with that login does not match Ms. Morgan's home internet." The judge looked at the Morgan lawyer. "Where does it match?" the judge asked. Nora smiled. "It matches the residential IP address of a guest house located at 44 Willow Creek Lane, the residence of Mr. Graham Morgan." The courtroom went silent. Miles Hartwell stopped checking his watch. "So," Nora continued, "either my client broke into her brother's house at 3 a.m. to hack the company she used to run, or someone inside that house used her old credentials to frame her." The judge looked at Miles. "Mr. Hartwell, do you have an explanation for this?" Miles stood up, his face red. I am not an IT expert, Your Honor. I rely on the reports provided to me." The judge narrowed her eyes. "This smells like bad faith. Counselor, I am ordering the devices returned to Ms. Morgan immediately, and I am ordering limited discovery into the server access logs for the past 30 days. If I find that this court is being used to harass a whistleblower, there will be sanctions." We walked out of the courtroom with my laptop. Miles pushed past us, furiously typing on his phone. "They tried to frame me," I said to Nora, "and they were so arrogant they didn't even use a VPN. Graham is not a smart criminal." Nora said, "He is just a privileged one. We had won a skirmish, but the war was still scheduled for Friday. The merger vote. We needed allies inside the boardroom." I looked at the list of directors. Most were cronies of my father or golf buddies of Graham, but there was one name that stood out. Seth Calder. Seth was new. He had been brought in 6 months ago to add independent oversight. He was a retired manufacturing CEO from Ohio, a man with a reputation for being boring, by the book, and utterly honest. He was the window dressing. They brought him in to make the board look legitimate while they robbed the place. I found out where Seth was staying. The Greyhaven Marriott. I went there at 6 o'clock, waiting in the lobby. When he walked in, wearing a trench coat and looking tired, I stood up. "Mr. Calder?" I said. He stopped. He looked at me, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Ms. Morgan," he said, I don't think I should be speaking to you. The lawyers sent a memo. The lawyers work for the people who are lying to you." "Seth," I said. He looked around the lobby. He looked nervous. "Please," I said. 5 minutes. He hesitated, then nodded. We sat in a quiet corner near the fireplace. "I know why you joined the board," I said. "You wanted to help a legacy company transition to the next generation. You wanted to be a mentor." "I did," Seth said. "I respected your grandfather. I respected him too." I said, "That is why I need you to know what you are voting for on Friday." I slid a folder across the low table. It contained the sanitized ledger with my notes about the machine leasebacks and a summary of the copper futures loss. "Read the page about the inventory hedging," I said. Seth opened the folder. He put on his reading glasses. He read in silence for a long time. His face grew pale. "Inventory hedging," he muttered. "In 2023? We didn't have a hedging program." I asked Miles about the risk profile, and he said we were purely spot market. "He lied to you." I said, He lied to cover a $2 million gambling loss by my brother. Seth closed the folder. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. If this is true, he said, his voice shaking, I am liable. I signed the audit certification. I could lose my license. I could be sued. You were misled. I said, you are a victim of fraud, just like the shareholders. But on Friday, if you vote for that merger, you become an accomplice. He looked at me. What do you want me to do? He asked. If I vote no, they still have the majority. Celeste and Ronan control 51%. I don't need you to win the vote. Seth, I said, I need you to stall. I need you to ask questions. I need you to demand a recess. I need you to refuse to certify the minutes. Why? Because I am going to walk into that meeting with something that trumps their 51%. I said, and when I do, I need one person in that room who is willing to acknowledge the truth. Seth looked at the fire. He was a decent man trapped in a burning building. I didn't sign up for this, he whispered. None of us did. I said, but we are here. I leaned forward. Seth, I promise you, if you help me stabilize the company, I am not looking for heads on spikes. I am not going to ruin innocent people. I won't touch the pensions. I won't harm the families of the people who just did what they were told. I just want the people who gave the orders. He looked at me, searching my face. You sound like Edwin, he said. I am the only one left who does. I said. He nodded slowly. I will read the file, he said, and on Friday, I will ask about the hedging. Thursday night, the eve of the vote, I was at Nora's office. We were surrounded by boxes of paper. We were exhausted. We had the debt leverage. We had the evidence of fraud. We had a wavering director. But we still didn't have the one thing that mattered most, the confirmation of the shares. We had sent the demand to the transfer agent, a massive bureaucratic bank in New York, claiming that the Harbor Light shares were active based on the triggers. We had sent the proof of the North Pine payments to show the executive compensation trigger had been pulled, but the transfer agent hadn't replied. If they didn't recognize the shares before the meeting started, I would just be a disruptive ex-employee waving a piece of paper. It was 9 p.m. Maybe they went home, I said, staring at the phone. Nora shook her head. Not in this department. Complex disputes work 24 hours. I paced the room. If we don't get it, I said, we have to file the injunction. We have to try to stop the meeting legally. Nora had the motion drafted, but we both knew it was a long shot. 11 p.m., the fax machine in the corner whirred to life. I jumped. Nora froze. We watched the paper slowly curl out of the machine. It was agonizingly slow. Nora ripped it off before it was finished. She scanned the header. First National Trust Company. Shareholder Services Division. She read the first paragraph. Her eyes widened. She read the second paragraph. She gasped. What? I asked. What does it say? Nora looked up at me. She was smiling. Regarding the entity known as Harbor Light Equity Partners, she read. We have reviewed the trust formation documents and the evidence of triggering events provided by legal counsel. She took a breath. We find that the conditions for activation were met on February 12, 2025. Consequently, the voting rights associated with the Class A common stock held by Harbor Light are hereby reinstated effective immediately. She handed me the paper. Look at the count. Lila. I looked at the bottom of the page. Total voting power, 67.4%. Authorized representative, Lila Marie Morgan. I sank into the chair. We have it, I whispered. We have the majority. Nora said, you don't just own the debt. You own the board. You own the company. I looked at the date. February 12th. That was the day the first major payment to North Pine cleared. I had been the owner for 8 months. When they fired me, I was their boss. When they humiliated me at dinner, I could have fired them all. The irony was bitter, but the victory was sweet. I stood up. I folded the paper carefully. Tomorrow morning. I said, tomorrow morning. Nora agreed. We are going to crash a party. I drove home through the quiet streets of Greyhaven. I passed the factory. The lights were on in the third shift. Smoke was rising from the stacks. There were 300 people working in there, 300 families depending on that paycheck. My family had treated them like poker chips. They had treated the steel like a game. I gripped the steering wheel. Tomorrow. The game ended. I wasn't going in to destroy my family. I was going in to save the company from them. But as I pulled into my driveway, I knew that to my mother, to Graham, to my father, it would look like the same thing. I checked my phone one last time. A text from Seth Calder. I read the file. I'm in. I closed my eyes. It was time to take back the keys. The headquarters of Morgan Foundry was a brutalist brick fortress that sat on the edge of the river, a testament to the industrial might of the last century. Today, however, the loading docks were hidden behind temporary screens, and the employee parking lot was filled with luxury sedans. It was the annual general meeting of shareholders. I pulled my car into the lot, parking in a spot far away from the entrance. Nora Kessler sat in the passenger seat. On her lap, she held a thick, sealed envelope stamped with the seal of the First National Trust Company. "Are you ready?" Nora asked. I looked at the building. I had taken my first steps in that lobby. I had learned to ride a bike in that parking lot on a Sunday when the plant was closed. I am ready, I said. We got out of the car. The wind was whipping off the river, cold and biting. I buttoned my coat. I wasn't wearing my usual work clothes, the boots and jeans of an operations director. Today, I wore a tailored black suit. I looked like what they had always told me I wasn't, a partner. We walked to the main entrance. A security checkpoint had been set up. 2 large men in blazers stood by the glass doors, holding clipboards. I recognized one of them. It was Mike, the head of site security. Mike had taught me how to use the fire suppression system when I was 22. "Morning." "Mike," I said, stepping up to the velvet rope. Mike looked down at his clipboard, then at me. His face flushed red. "Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice low. I have orders." "Orders?" I asked. "You are not on the list," Mike said. "Explicit instructions from the chairwoman. No non-shareholders allowed." I looked past him, through the glass doors. I could see my mother, Celeste. She was standing in the lobby, greeting a group of investors. She looked radiant in a cream-colored suit, playing the part of the gracious matriarch. She saw me. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. She turned her back. "Mike," I said softly, "I am a shareholder." Mike looked miserable. "Lila, please, don't make me do this. Mr. Hartwell said if I let you in. I am fired. I have 2 kids in college." I felt a flash of anger, not at Mike, but at the cruelty of putting him in this position. "I understand, Mike," I said. "But if you don't let me in, you won't be fired by Mr. Hartwell. You will be sued by me, and I will win." Nora stepped forward. She didn't look like a grandmotherly country lawyer today. She looked like a shark in tweed. She slapped a document onto Mike's clipboard. "This is a certified affidavit of ownership, authorized by the transfer agent, confirming that Ms. Lila Morgan holds a controlling interest in this corporation," Nora said, her voice projecting so the people in the line behind us could hear. "Under Delaware law and the corporate bylaws, denying entry to a majority shareholder is a felony interference with corporate governance." Nora leaned in. "Do you want to go to jail for Miles Hartwell, Mike?" Mike looked at the document. He looked at the seal. He looked at the line of impatient investors behind us. He unhooked the velvet rope. "Go on in." "Lila," he whispered, "give them hell. Thank you." "Mike," I said. We walked through the doors. The lobby smelled of fresh lilies and expensive coffee. The murmur of conversation stopped as I walked in. Heads turned. I saw my cousin Sarah, holding a tray of champagne flutes, freeze mid-step. Celeste turned around. Her face was a mask of polite confusion, but I could see the vein pulsing in her neck. "Lila," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "What a surprise. I thought you understood that this is a private business meeting. It is a shareholder meeting." "Mother," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged space. "And I am here to vote." Celeste laughed, a light dismissive sound. "Oh, honey, you don't have any shares. We bought out your employee stock options when you were let go, remember?" She signaled to Miles Hartwell, who was standing near the elevators. He started walking toward us, his face tight. "I didn't sell my options," I said, "and that is not what I am here to vote with." Miles arrived. He blocked my path to the conference hall. "This is disruption," Miles hissed. "Leave now, or I call the police." "Call them," I said. "I would love to show them the preservation order you violated." Miles flinched. Nora stepped between us. "Mr. Hartwell," Nora said, "we are entering the meeting. If you touch my client, I will add assault to the list of charges we are preparing for the DA." Miles hesitated. He looked at Celeste. Celeste gave a barely perceptible nod, a tight jerk of her chin. "Let her in. We will kill her on the floor." We walked past them, into the grand hall. The room was set up like a theater. Rows of chairs faced a raised dais where the board of directors sat. A large screen behind them displayed the logo of Morgan Foundry next to the logo of Brackenrow Industries, a new era of growth. The slide read, I took a seat in the front row, directly in front of my father. Ronan was sitting at the center of the table, staring at his water glass. He looked gray. He didn't look up when I sat down. Graham was there, sitting next to Celeste's empty chair. He glared at me, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. Celeste took the stage. She adjusted the microphone. "Welcome, everyone," she said. "We have a tight agenda today, so let's get started. As you know, we are here to ratify the historic merger with Brackenrow Industries. This deal represents a 40% premium on your current share value." There was applause from the back of the room, mostly from the institutional investors who just wanted a quick payout, but the front rows, filled with the old-timers, the retired foremen who held stock, and the local business owners, remained quiet. They knew what Brackenrow did. They knew it meant layoffs. I moved to dispense with the reading of the minutes and proceed immediately to the vote. Graham said quickly, "Seconded." Miles called out, "Hold on." An elderly man in the third row stood up. It was Mr. Henderson, a man who had worked with my grandfather for 40 years. "We usually have a financial review." Mr. Henderson said, "I want to ask about the inventory write-downs I saw in the quarterly report. This is an emergency meeting." "Mr. Henderson," Celeste said smoothly, "we can discuss operational details after the merger is approved. All those in favor of the motion to proceed?" "Aye," said the board members in unison. Motion carried. Celeste said, "We will now open the voting for the merger agreement." She was railroading it. She was trying to get the vote done before I could speak. "Objection." Nora's voice rang out like a gunshot. Celeste sighed into the microphone. "Ms. Kessler, you are not a shareholder. Please sit down. I am legal counsel for a beneficial owner," Nora said. "And I object to the proceedings on the grounds that the proxy statement provided to these shareholders is materially false and misleading." Celeste gripped the podium. "Security, remove her," Celeste said. I stood up. "Sit down." "Mother," I said. The room went deadly silent. "Lila," Celeste hissed, "you are embarrassing yourself. You are not a shareholder of record. The register is closed." "That is incorrect," I said. I held up the packet Nora had brought. "I am the beneficial owner of the Class A shares held by Harbor Light Equity Partners. Those shares carry 67% of the voting power of this company, and I have not authorized this merger." Graham laughed. He leaned into his microphone. "Harbor Light is a defunct shell." He sneered. "It was dissolved 5 years ago. You are holding a piece of paper for a ghost." Nora walked to the front of the room. She placed a stack of documents on the table in front of the court reporter. "I am submitting into the record the sworn affidavit of the transfer agent, confirming that Harbor Light was reactivated on February 12th of this year, pursuant to the integrity triggers established by Edwin Morgan." Nora said. She turned to the crowd. "And I am also submitting the preservation order issued by the Superior Court 3 days ago, along with a forensic log showing that Celeste Morgan and Miles Hartwell attempted to delete the records of this trust from the company servers on the night Lila Morgan was fired. Murmurs broke out in the room. Mr. Henderson looked at my father. "Ronan?" Mr. Henderson asked, "Is this true?" Ronan didn't answer. He just stared at the table. "This is a lie," Graham shouted, standing up. "She is making this up. She is unstable." "Is she?" Nora asked. "Or is she the only one telling the truth?" Nora pointed to the side door. "Mr. Merritt?" The door opened. Jules Merritt walked in. He looked like he was walking to the gallows. He was shaking. He wore a suit that was slightly too big for him. Jules walked to the front of the room. He didn't look at Miles. He didn't look at Celeste. He looked at me. "State your name for the record," Nora said. "Julian Merritt," Jules whispered into the microphone Nora held out to him. "And your position?" I was, a senior accountant for Morgan Foundry. Tell the shareholders what you told me," Nora said. Jules took a deep breath. He looked at the audience. He saw the faces of people he had worked with for years. "I was instructed, by Mr. Hartwell, to backdate the board minutes regarding the sale of machinery to Crescent Ridge Industrial," Jules said. His voice cracked. "Liar," Miles shouted. "You are fired. Merritt, get out. Let him speak." "Mr. Henderson shouted back. Jules flinched, but he kept going. "I was told to alter the dates to make it look like the assets were sold before the Harbor Light triggers could activate," Jules said, tears running down his face. "And I was told to hide the losses from the copper futures trading in the inventory hedging account." "Copper futures?" someone in the back shouted. "We don't trade futures. We did," Jules said. "Mr. Graham Morgan authorized the trades. We lost $2.4 million. The room erupted. People were standing up. Shout of fraud and "Where is the money?" filled the air. Celeste was banging the gavel, but no one was listening. "Order!" she screamed. "Order!" I looked at Seth Calder. He was sitting at the end of the table. He looked pale. He was gripping his water glass so hard his knuckles were white. "Seth," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the acoustic sweet spot of the front row, it carried. Seth looked at me. "You know it is true." "Seth," I said, "you saw the file. Don't go down with them." Seth looked at Celeste. She was glaring at him, daring him to speak. Seth stood up. He adjusted his tie. He leaned into his microphone. I have a statement," Seth said. Celeste put her hand over her microphone. "Sit down, you coward," she hissed at him. Seth ignored her. "I was asked to join this board 6 months ago to provide independent oversight," Seth said. His voice was steady now. "I was told the company was financially sound." He paused. "However, upon reviewing the documents provided to me by Ms. Morgan, I have confirmed that the vendor approvals for North Pine Logistics bypassed the audit committee." He looked directly at the shareholders. "I asked the chairwoman about this yesterday. She told me that if I wanted to keep my seat, I should stop asking questions." Gasps rippled through the room. "I cannot, in good conscience, vote for this merger," Seth said, "and I'm hereby resigning from the board, effective immediately." He took off his lapel pin, the gold Morgan Foundry gear, and placed it on the table. Then he walked off the dais. The room was in chaos. Celeste's face was white. Her control was shattering. "Recess," she shouted. "I call a recess. We need to verify these claims. Clear the room." She motioned to security. "No," I shouted. I walked up the stairs to the dais. I stood at the end of the table, looking down the line at my family. "There will be no recess," I said, "and there will be no merger vote." "Who do you think you are?" Graham spat. "You are nothing. You are a failed manager with a fake lawyer. I am the person holding the note on your debt." "Graham," I said. I pulled the assignment of debt document from my pocket. "Ironwood Holdings is me." I said, "I own the Harrogate loan." Miles Hartwell dropped his pen. It clattered on the table. "You?" Miles whispered. "And," I continued, turning to the shareholders, "if you vote for this merger today, you trigger a change of control default. I will call the loan. I will foreclose on Ridgefield Works tomorrow morning. The company will be bankrupt, and your shares will be worth zero. I looked at the board members, and since you have been informed of the fraud, if you proceed, you will be personally liable for the damages. They will come for your houses. They will come for your pensions. The other directors, the cronies who usually just nodded along, looked terrified. They started whispering to each other, pushing their chairs back. "You can't do that," Celeste said. Her voice was trembling. "You wouldn't destroy your father's legacy. You already destroyed it." "Mother," I said, "I am just trying to salvage the scrap." She looked at Ronan. "Ronan, tell her," Celeste commanded. "Tell her to stop." Ronan looked up at me. His eyes were red. He looked at me, his daughter, standing there with the truth in my hands. He looked at Celeste, the woman who had run his life for 30 years. He opened his mouth. "Lila." He started. I waited. I waited for the apology. I waited for him to stand up and be the father I remembered. "Lila, sit down," he said softly. "We can work something out. Just don't make a scene." He looked away. He put his hand on Celeste's arm, comforting her. He chose her. He chose the lie. I felt something break inside me. It wasn't my heart. That had broken weeks ago. It was the last tether of obligation. "I am not making a scene." "Dad," I said, "I am making a motion." Graham slammed his fist on the table. He stood up, his face purple with rage. "You don't have the votes," he screamed. "You don't have anything. Grandfather knew you were weak. That is why he hid the shares." The room went quiet. Graham froze. He realized what he had said. That is why he hid the shares. I smiled. It was a cold, sad smile. "Thank you, Graham." I said, "You just admitted you knew the shares existed, which means the official stance that Harbor Light was dissolved was a lie you knowingly told." Graham slumped back into his chair. He looked like a child who had just broken a vase. "Mr. Henderson stood up in the audience. "I move to suspend the current board pending an investigation," he shouted. "Second," called out another shareholder. "And I move to suspend the CFO immediately," someone else yelled. The room was turning into a mob. Celeste grabbed the gavel. She banged it so hard the head flew off and skittered across the table. "You cannot vote," she shrieked. "You don't have the majority. We control 51%. I turned to the side of the stage. "Mr. Inspector?" I said. A man in a gray suit walked out from the wings. It was the representative from the Independent Election Inspector Service, the neutral third party required by law for contested meetings. He walked to the microphone. He held a tablet. "We have received a certified update from the transfer agent regarding the voting rights of the Class A stock," the inspector said. His voice was monotone, cutting through the emotion in the room like a knife. He adjusted his glasses. "We have verified the identity of the beneficial owner and the activation of the underlying trust conditions." He looked at Celeste. "The chairwoman's count of 51% is incorrect. The shares held by the Morgan Crest Trust have been diluted by the reactivation of the Harbor Light block." He looked at the audience. "The current voting roll shows that Ms. Lila Morgan controls 67.4% of the voting shares." 67.4%. The number hung in the air. Celeste slumped in her chair. She looked small. Suddenly, she wasn't the titan of industry. She was just an old woman in a nice suit who had lost everything. "That means," the inspector continued, "that Ms. Morgan's motion to postpone the merger is carried by the majority. The merger is dead." Cheers erupted from the floor. People were clapping. Mr. Henderson was wiping his eyes. I didn't cheer. I felt exhausted. I walked to the microphone at the end of the table. I also moved to remove the current board of directors. "Effective immediately," I said. The inspector tapped on his tablet. Motion carried. And I moved to appoint an interim board, consisting of myself, Seth Calder, if he will accept, and Daria Voss. Seth looked up from the audience, where he had been standing. He nodded slowly. Motion carried. The inspector said, I looked at Celeste, Ronan, Graham, and Miles. "Please vacate the stage," I said. Graham looked at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "I will sue you. I will bury you. You can try." "Graham," I said, "but you will have to do it with your own money. The company credit card is cancelled." He stormed off the stage. Miles followed him, grabbing his briefcase, looking like a rat escaping a sinking ship. Ronan stood up slowly. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, pathetic sadness. He looked like a man waking up from a long dream to find his house had burned down. He offered his hand to Celeste. "Come on, Ellie," he said, using her middle name, the one he only used in private. Celeste didn't move for a moment. She stared at me. She was searching for the weakness, for the crack in the armor where she could still stick a knife, but she didn't find one. She stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She regained her composure, wrapping it around herself like armor. "You will fail." "Lila," she said, "it is harder than it looks." She took Ronan's arm and they walked off the stage, descending the stairs into the crowd that parted for them like the Red Sea. Not out of respect, but out of discomfort. I watched them go. I was alone on the dais. The room quieted down. 300 faces looked up at me. They were waiting. They were scared. They wanted to know if they still had jobs. They wanted to know if the company would survive. I walked to the center podium. I placed my hands on the wood. It was warm from Celeste's grip. I took a breath. "My name is Lila Morgan," I said into the microphone, "and we have a lot of work to do." The meeting lasted another 2 hours. It was grueling. I had to answer questions about the debt, about the fraud, about the payroll. I had to promise that the investigations would be transparent. When it was finally over, the room cleared out. I sat on the edge of the stage, my legs dangling. Nora sat in a chair next to me, kicking off her heels. "We did it," she said softly. "We did." I said. I looked at the empty hall. I felt the weight of it. 67%. It wasn't a prize. It was a burden. I owned the fraud now. I owned the debt. I owned the broken trust. Jules walked up to the stage. He looked drained, but he looked lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "What happens now?" Jules asked. "Am I fired?" "No. Jules," I said, "you are on administrative leave while we sort this out. But you cooperate with the auditors. You tell them everything. You help us find every penny Graham stole." "I will," he said. "And Jules? Yeah? Go home and kiss your daughter." He smiled. A real smile this time. "Thanks, Lila." He left. Nora stood up. "I need a drink," she said. "A very stiff drink, and then I need to sleep for a week." "Go," I said. "I will lock up." "Are you sure?" she asked. I nodded. "I need a minute," I said. Nora left. I was alone in the cavernous room. I looked at the screen behind me. A new era of growth. I reached over and unplugged the projector. The screen went dark. I walked down the steps. I walked out of the hall and into the lobby. The security guards were gone. The reception desk was empty. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the top floor, the executive suite. The doors opened. The hallway was silent. I walked past Graham's office. The door was open. Papers were scattered on the floor. He had raided the place before he left. I walked past Miles's office, locked. I walked to the end of the hall, to the corner office, my grandfather's office, the one Celeste had occupied for 5 years. I pushed the door open. It still smelled like her perfume. I walked to the desk. It was massive, mahogany. I sat down in the leather chair. It was still warm. I looked out the window. The sun was setting over the river, turning the gray water to gold. I could see the smoke rising from the foundry stacks below. I was the CEO. I was the chairman. I was the owner. I picked up the phone on the desk. It had a dial tone. I was about to call Daria Voss to tell her the news when my cell phone buzzed. I looked at it. A text message. It wasn't from Graham. It wasn't from my father. It was from a number I didn't know. "Check the safe." I frowned. I looked around the room. There was a wall safe behind a painting of the original foundry. Everyone knew about it. It was where Celeste kept the petty cash. I stood up and moved the painting. The safe door was open, empty. But then I saw it, taped to the inside of the safe door. A small, yellow sticky note. I peeled it off. It was Celeste's handwriting. Elegant, spidery. This isn't over. The trust isn't the only thing Edwin hid. I stared at the note. A chill went down my spine. My phone buzzed again. A news alert. Morgan Family Trust beneficiaries call emergency meeting. I looked out the window. I had won the battle. I had taken the castle. But as I looked at the darkening sky, I realized the war wasn't over. My mother hadn't retreated. She had just moved to a new position. I crumpled the note in my hand. Let them come. I whispered to the empty room. I swiveled the chair to face the desk. I pulled a fresh legal pad from the drawer. I picked up a pen. At the top of the page, I wrote, Day 1. Then I started to work. The morning sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive boardroom, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was 8 o'clock on Monday. The room was silent, but it was a loud silence, the kind that screams of impending violence. I sat at the head of the table. It was the seat my grandfather, Edwin Morgan, had occupied for 40 years. It was the seat my mother, Celeste, had warmed for the last 5. Now it was mine. To my right sat Nora Kessler, her legal pad ready. To my left sat Seth Calder, the only director who had survived the purge of the shareholder meeting, and next to him was Daria Voss, who had agreed to step in as an interim director to stabilize the ship. Opposite us sat the remnants of the old regime. My father, Ronan, looked like a ghost. He wore a suit, but his tie was crooked, his eyes rimmed with red. Graham sat next to him, vibrating with a mixture of caffeine and rage. Miles Hartwell, the CFO, was sweating through his shirt, clutching a leather portfolio as if it were a life raft. Celeste was not there. She had refused to attend, claiming a migraine, but her absence felt more like a strategic retreat than an illness. I placed my hands on the mahogany table. I call this emergency meeting of the board of directors to order. I said, my voice was steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Graham scoffed. You are enjoying this, aren't you? He spat. Playing queen of the castle. I ignored him. I looked at the agenda Nora had typed up. First order of business, I said. A motion to restructure the executive leadership team for cause. I looked at Miles. Mr. Hartwell? I said. Miles jumped slightly. Yes? He squeaked. Based on the preliminary findings of the forensic audit regarding the North Pine Logistics payments and the inventory hedging irregularities, the board has lost confidence in your ability to manage the financial controls of Morgan Foundry. I slid a piece of paper across the table. You are hereby relieved of your duties as Chief Financial Officer, effective immediately. Your access to all company accounts has been revoked. Security will escort you to your vehicle. Miles looked at the paper. Then he looked at Graham. Graham? Miles pleaded. You said we had a strategy. Graham didn't look at him. Graham was looking at the window. His jaw clenched tight. I have rights, Miles shouted. Standing up, my contract has a severance clause. 3 years of salary. Your contract has a clawback clause for fraud, Nora said calmly, not looking up from her notes. And considering you admitted to Mr. Merritt that you ordered the backdating of federal documents, I would suggest you save your severance arguments for your criminal defense attorney. Miles turned pale. He looked at the door. 2 security guards, men I had hired that morning, not the old firm, stepped forward. Please, Miles whispered, I have a mortgage. You should have thought about that before you leased my own machines back to me. I said. The guards took him by the arms. He didn't fight. He just sagged, a man whose entire identity was built on being the smartest guy in the room, realizing he was just the most useful idiot. When the doors closed behind him, the room felt lighter, but also colder. Next item, I said. Filling the vacancy, I motioned to the door. Please welcome Tessa Arden. The door opened and Tessa walked in. She was a woman of 50 with short, sharp hair, and a reputation that terrified lazy executives across the eastern seaboard. She was a turnaround specialist, a forensic accountant who specialized in cleaning up ethical disasters. Tessa didn't smile. She walked to the table and set down a thick briefcase. Ms. Arden will serve as interim compliance lead and acting CFO. I said, "She answers directly to the board, not the CEO." Graham laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "You are bringing in a liquidator," he said. "That is what she is. She is an undertaker. You are killing the company." "Lila, I am excising the infection." "Graham," I said, "Tessa is here to make sure we don't get indicted." The doors opened again. This time, it wasn't a new hire. It was Celeste. She walked in wearing a black dress, looking for all the world like a grieving widow, though her husband was sitting right there. She carried a single, manila envelope. "I apologize for my tardiness," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I had to retrieve a document from the vault at the estate." She walked to the table and stood opposite me. She didn't sit. She loomed. "Before you proceed with any further dismantling of this family's legacy," Celeste said, "there is a matter of governance that must be addressed." She opened the envelope and slid a document onto the table. It was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. "We found this last night," she said, tucked inside Edwin's old Bible. I looked at the paper. It was handwritten. Codicil to the last will and testament of Edwin Morgan. I read the text. It was short. "I, Edwin Morgan, being of sound mind, hereby revoke the formation of the Harbor Light Equity Partners Trust. I realize that such a division of power will only lead to conflict. All assets previously assigned to Harbor Light shall revert immediately to the Morgan Crest Trust." It was dated June 3rd, 2 days before he died. Graham smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just been dealt a royal flush. "Looks like your 67% just evaporated." "Lee," he said. The room went silent. If this was real, everything I had done, the vote, the firing of Miles, the board seats, was invalid. I was trespassing. Nora reached out. "May I?" she asked. Celeste hesitated, then nodded. "By all means. Read it and weep, counselor." Nora picked up the paper. She held it up to the light. She felt the texture with her thumb. She pulled a jeweler's loop from her pocket. Nora was always prepared, and peered at the ink. She studied it for a long minute. The silence stretched until it was painful. Then, Nora chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound. "What is so funny?" Graham demanded. Nora placed the paper back on the table. "This is a very good attempt." "Celeste," Nora said, "really, you even found the right vintage of Mont Blanc ink. Edwin always favored midnight blue." "It is genuine," Celeste said, her eyes flashing. "It is his handwriting. It is a simulation of his handwriting," Nora corrected. "But there are 3 problems." Nora held up 3 fingers. "1," Nora said, "this paper, it is a linen blend. 20-pound bond. Edwin was a creature of habit. For legal documents, he only ever used 24-pound cotton bond from a stationer in London. He didn't own any linen paper." Celeste stiffened. 2, Nora continued. "The witnesses. You have 2 signatures here. Margaret Vane and Beatrice Holt. What of them?" Celeste snapped. "They were old friends of the family. They are your bridge partners." "Celeste," Nora said, "and Beatrice Holt was in Europe in June of that year. I know because I handled a property closing for her son, and we had to courier the documents to Paris. She couldn't have witnessed this in Greyhaven." Graham stopped smiling. "And 3, Nora said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "The date, June 3rd. She looked at my father, Ronan. Where was Edwin on June 3rd? Ronan looked up. His face was gray. He was in the ICU. Ronan whispered. "Exactly," Nora said. "He was in a medically induced coma following his second stroke. He couldn't lift a spoon, let alone write a codicil with perfect penmanship." Nora pushed the document back toward Celeste. "This is a forgery. Celeste, and unlike the board minutes, This is a forgery of a testamentary document. That is not just fraud. That is a felony that carries a mandatory prison sentence. Celeste snatched the paper off the table. Her hands were shaking. You cannot prove that, she hissed. I don't have to prove it to you. Mother, I said. I just have to prove it to the probate judge. Do you want me to call him? Celeste stared at me. For the first time in my life, I saw true fear in her eyes. She crushed the paper in her hand. You are ungrateful, she whispered. After everything we gave you gave me nothing. I said, you took everything. Now sit down. Or leave. Celeste sat. She crumpled into the chair next to Graham. The wind had gone out of her sails, leaving her looking small and old. Graham, however, was not done. He was cornered, and cornered animals bite. Fine, Graham said, slamming his hand on the table. You want to play hardball? Let's play. He pulled out his phone. I have my lawyer on speed dial. If you push this, Lila, I will file an injunction against the new board. I will tie this company up in litigation for 10 years. I will drain the accounts with legal fees until there isn't enough cash left to buy a paperclip. He leaned forward, his eyes wild. And do you know who suffers? Not me. I have a trust fund. The workers suffer. 300 people will lose their jobs because you want to play hero. Do you want that on your conscience? The layoffs? The foreclosures in town? It will all be your fault. It was a classic hostage negotiation tactic. Threaten the innocent to break the moral. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had gambled away $2 million on copper futures. I expected this. Graham, I said. I turned to Tessa. Ms. Arden, please distribute the Employee Protection Plan. Tessa opened her briefcase and slid a stack of folders down the table. Graham didn't touch his. We are not going to litigation. Graham, I said, and we are not going to lay people off. I opened the folder. This plan, which the new board approved in our pre-meeting session at 7 a.m., guarantees no mass layoffs for 24 months. It establishes a hardship fund for employees, funded by the liquidation of executive perks, specifically the company jet and the country club memberships. Graham's jaw dropped. You can't sell the jet, he said. I just did, I said. And furthermore, we are implementing a transparent audit policy. Every expense over $500 will be published internally, and we have established an anonymous whistleblower hotline, administered by a third party, with cash rewards for identifying waste or theft. I looked at him dead in the eye. I am not here to punish the workers. Graham, I am here to protect them from you. If you sue us, I will depose you. I will put you on the stand and ask you about the copper futures under oath. Do you want that? Graham opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Celeste. She was staring at the table, clutching her crumpled forgery. She offered him no help. Graham sank back in his chair. He was defeated, but the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like surgery, necessary, bloody, and exhausting. Then, Tessa spoke up. Ms. Morgan, she said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the emotional haze. Yes. Tessa, I have been reviewing the live cash accounts while you were speaking. She said, I found something. She turned her laptop around so we could see the screen. There is a cash account listed under miscellaneous retainers, she said. It has been paying out $50,000 a month for the last 5 years. To whom? I asked. To an entity called Crestwell Fiduciary Services, Tessa said. The room went still. Crestwell Fiduciary was not a vendor. They were the administrators of the Morgan Family Trust. They managed the personal wealth of my parents and Graham. Why is the company paying the family trust administrators? I asked. Tessa clicked a key. I drilled down into the invoices. She said, they are marked Settlement Maintenance. She looked at me. Lila, this ties back to a vendor dispute from 5 years ago. A small trucking company in Ohio. There was an accident. A driver was killed. The company was liable because the load wasn't secured properly. I remembered that. It was a tragedy. We settled with the family. That is what the public record says, Tessa said. But these payments, they are hush money. They are going to a private account controlled by the trustee at Crestwell, and looking at the email traffic attached to the invoices." She hesitated. "Say it, Tessa." "The email suggests the load wasn't secured because the loading dock manager was ordered to bypass safety checks to get the shipment out by 5 p.m. to meet a bonus quota." "Who gave the order?" I asked, though I already felt the sickness rising in my throat. Tessa looked at the screen. The order was signed by Ronan Morgan. I turned to my father. He was sitting very still. He looked like a statue made of ash. "Dad?" I whispered. Ronan closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out and rolled down his cheek, getting lost in the wrinkles of his face. "It was the end of the quarter," Ronan said softly. His voice was a dry rattle. "We were behind on the numbers," Celeste said. "She said we had to show growth." I stared at him. "You skipped the safety checks?" I asked. "A man died. Dad, I didn't mean for it to happen," Ronan said, his voice rising in panic. "It was just one truck, just one shipment, and when he died." Celeste handled it. She told me to sign the settlement papers. She told me Crestwell would make it go away. He looked at Celeste. "You told me it was for the family, Ellie. You told me if the truth came out, we would lose the insurance. We would lose the contracts." Celeste didn't look at him. She was staring at the wall, her face a mask of stone. "So you paid hush money with company funds for 5 years?" I asked, "to cover up a negligent homicide?" Ronan put his head in his hands. "I was afraid. Lila," he sobbed. "I was afraid of losing the business. I was afraid of losing her." I looked at him, this man, who I had idolized as a child, who I thought was just weak. He wasn't just weak. He was complicit. He had traded a man's life for a quarterly bonus and a quiet marriage. I felt the weight of it crushing me. This was the legacy I had fought so hard to save, a legacy built on bones and bribes. Victory tasted like ash in my mouth. I had won. I had the company. I had the chair. But the prize was a rotting corpse. My family had built an identity around power. They were the Morgans of Greyhaven. They were the kings of the hill. And my existence, my competence, my questions, my very breath, threatened that story. So they tried to erase me, and now I had erased them, but I was left with the wreckage. Suddenly, the phone in the center of the table buzzed. It was the red line, the direct line for major crises. Tessa answered it. She listened for a moment, her face growing pale. She put the phone down on the table on speaker. "It is the CEO of Wexford Municipal Works," Tessa said. "Wexford, our biggest customer, 40% of our revenue." I leaned forward. "This is Lila Morgan." I said, "Ms. Morgan." The voice on the line was cold and hard. "This is Thomas Anson. I am watching the news. I see reports of a boardroom coup. I see allegations of fraud." "Mr. Anson," I began, "we are taking corrective action." "Save it." Anson cut me off. "We have a municipal charter. We cannot do business with vendors under investigation for criminal fraud. I have the mayor on the other line. He wants to terminate the contract." My stomach dropped. If Wexford walked, the company collapsed. The employee protection plan, the turnaround, everything. It would all be gone. "Mr. Anson, please," I said, "we are cleaning house. The bad actors are being removed. I need more than words." "Ms. Morgan," Anson said, "I need assurances. I need to know that you are not just reshuffling the deck chairs. I need to know that you are cooperating with the authorities. Full transparency, or we pull the contract in 48 hours. The line went dead. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. 48 hours. Graham looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "You can't do it," he said. "If you give them full transparency, you have to give them the Crestwell files. You have to give them the hush money records. If I do that," I said slowly, realizing the horror of the choice. "If you do that," Graham said, his voice rising, "they will indict Dad. They will indict Mom. And me? You will send your own family to prison. Lila." He stood up. "You can't do it. You are a Morgan. We protect our own." I looked at Ronan. He was weeping silently. I looked at Celeste. She was watching me, her eyes calculating. She was betting on my blood. She was betting that I was still the daughter who wanted their love. I looked at the window, at the smoke rising from the factory. 300 families. 300 people who had nothing to do with this. If I protected my family, the company died. The workers lost everything. If I saved the company, my family went to prison. It wasn't a choice. It was a sacrifice. I turned to Nora. "Call the district attorney." I said. "Lila." "No," Graham shouted. "Call the SEC." I continued, my voice gaining strength. "And call Mr. Anson back. Tell him we are authorizing a full, independent forensic audit to be shared directly with his compliance office and the state prosecutors." "You bitch!" Celeste screamed. She lunged across the table. Security caught her before she reached me. "You are destroying us!" she screamed, struggling against the guards. "You are destroying this family." "No. Mother," I said, standing up, "I am saving the company. You destroyed the family a long time ago." I looked at the guards. "Remove them," I said. "All of them." They dragged Graham and Celeste out. Graham was cursing. Celeste was screaming incoherently. Ronan stood up on his own. He didn't scream. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw something like relief in his eyes. The lie was over. He didn't have to hide anymore. He walked out the door, his head bowed. The door closed. I sank into the chair. I felt hollowed out, scraped clean. Tessa looked at me. "You did the right thing, Lila," she said softly. "I know," I said, "but it doesn't feel good. It isn't supposed to." Daria said, "That is why it is called the hard thing. We have work to do," I said, forcing myself to sit up straight. "We have to prepare the files for the DA. We have to draft a statement for the employees." We worked for 10 hours straight. By the time we finished, the sun had gone down. It was midnight. The office was empty. Nora had gone home to sleep. Tessa and Daria had left to prepare the press release. I was alone in Edwin's office. I sat in the leather chair, looking out at the city lights. I was the majority owner. I controlled 67% of the stock. I had saved the Wexford contract. I had saved the jobs. But I had sent my mother and brother to face felony charges. I had exposed my father's shame to the world. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. There was a bottle of scotch there, Edwin's favorite brand. I poured a glass. I took a sip. It burned, grounding me. I picked up my phone. I was about to turn it off, to try and get some sleep on the leather couch. But then, a notification popped up. It was an automated alert from the Family Trust Management System, an old alert I had set up years ago and forgotten about. Alert: emergency meeting of beneficiaries called by trustee. Subject: liquidated damages and scorched earth clause. I stared at the screen. Scorched earth clause. Celeste, even out of the building, even facing indictment, she was making moves. She had called a meeting of the trust, the entity that still held the other 33% of the company, and more importantly, the entity that owned the land the factory sat on. The factory lease was separate from the company. Edwin had set it up that way for tax purposes. If the trust canceled the ground lease, the company would own the machines, the contracts, and the name, but we would have nowhere to operate. We would be evicted. She was going to burn it down. She would rather see the company destroyed than let me run it. I set the glass down. The amber liquid trembled. I had a choice. I could try to fight her in probate court, a battle that would take years and bleed us dry. Or I could rebuild. I could take the contracts, take the workers, and move. I could leave the legacy building, leave the bricks and mortar that held so many ghosts, and start something new, something that was purely mine. But that would mean walking away from the history. It would mean letting her win the final battle of the land, even if I won the war of the business. I looked at the sticky note I had found in the safe earlier. This isn't over. No, it wasn't. I stood up. I walked to the window. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't look like the scared girl who had been fired 3 weeks ago. I looked like a CEO. I typed a text to Nora. Get some sleep. Tomorrow. We look for new real estate. I put the phone in my pocket. Let them have the dirt. I whispered to the empty room. I have the fire. I turned off the light, leaving the office in darkness, and walked out to start the new legacy. Thank you so much for listening to Family Said You're Too Poor for Business Partnership. I own 67% of their company. This story was a journey through betrayal, corporate intrigue, and the high cost of justice. I hope you enjoyed Lila's transformation from an underdog to a powerhouse who wasn't afraid to make the impossible choices. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Did Lila make the right choice by turning her family in? And what do you think will happen next with Celeste's scorched earth plan? Please leave a comment below letting me know where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed this drama, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice served cold. Share your theories and thoughts in English in the comments section. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next story.